You know, there's something that I think needs to be said that I think a lot of people will agree with. I don't think the Super Mario Bros. Movie is actually peak fiction. Why do I say this in a Lupin III review? Films such as 2011's Rango and more recently 2023's Super Mario Bros. Movie are movies I can consider peak fiction because they're movies I thoroughly enjoy. There's your answer. Now let's get on with the review. Lupin III. What can I say about Lupin III that hasn't already been said? You know, from the looks of it, a lot of people really like Lupin III. I like Lupin, you like Lupin, we all like Lupin III. Even this guy over here.
It's pretty good.
Wait a minute, how'd you get into my home? Last year, I took a look at Mystery of Mamo, the first animated Lupin III movie to be released. And to give you a bit of recap, it's peak fiction. It's beautiful in terms of visuals, it's a wild story, and I described it as being a surreal masterpiece. But I don't know, what do you think? And more importantly, why don't you introduce yourself while you're at it?
Hi, it's me, Finny, from the hit channels FinnyInSpace and Spaceman Finn. Yeah, Mystery of Mama's pretty cool. Okay, fine, the movie's pretty wild, and I think that makes it a lot of fun to watch. Lupin III in general tends to strike a really good balance between having a relatively grounded setting and cast while still being absurd enough for me to go, yeah, okay, this weird little bluish old man child has historical figures walking around because of his whole immortality thing. That probably makes sense. I think the absurdity also helps with the comedy and keeping the series from going too dark. Well, I guess really that depends on the piece of media, but ideally, for me, Lupin III strikes a good balance between dramatic and silly, and I really see that in Mystery of Mamo.
Cool! Glad to have you on board, Finny of FinnyInSpace fame. Are you ready to review Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro, the most important Lupin III movie to date?
Sure, I mean, are you?
I've been waiting since my Mystery of Mamo review, so sure! But first, this video's sponsor.
You don't have a sponsor, do you?
That's not important right now. Let's just get into the actual intro. Castle of Cagliostro marks the theatrical debut of Hayao Miyazaki. Before that, however, there was part 1 of the anime. Part 1 had very poor viewership when it ran, let's get that out of the way. It doesn't help either that the original director of the anime, Masaki Osumi, was later fired from his directorial spot after refusing to change the anime to broaden its appeal to a wider audience.
Osumi was still around for a while, but would go uncredited before finally being scrubbed from the show, being replaced by Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki. Of course, the two of them worked on the anime beforehand, having their hand at the director's spot, more specifically starting with episode 7, but didn't take over completely until a couple episodes later. As part 1 of the anime came to an end, there wouldn't be a lot of Lupin III anime content, except for the semi-obscure 1974 live-action adaptation, Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, which I don't think you could really consider canon, it just exists.
Though through the success of reruns of Part 1, Part 2 was eventually picked up, often known as New Lupin III or the Red Jacket series as named by English-speaking fans, and eventually with the success of that anime, there'd be a crazy amount of new Lupin content among other things, leading to Lupin being an anime icon back in the day. And let's not forget about all the movies!
2 movies were released during the Red Jacket era, those being Mystery of Mamo, which was initially released in 1978.
Which, mind you, I looked at previously last April. You can check it out in the description below. Haha, self-promotion, yeah.
And the aforementioned topic of today's video, Castle of Cagliostro, which was released on December 15th, 1979.
Both movies released to quite a resounding success and act as opposites of one another in terms of mood. So with that said, let's finally take a look at the plot of Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro. The movie starts off with Lupin and Jigen robbing a casino. Pretty standard heist shenanigans so far, nothing too special. That's the movie, folks, wrap it up. Nah, I'm just messing with y'all. As Lupin and Jigen are driving away, however, Lupin begins to realize something. the money's counterfeit, leading into the main plot of the film, and also the beautiful opening credits sequence along with the song Fire Treasure playing in the background, composed by You and the Explosion Band and performed by Toshi Kihara, also known as Bobby. I won't play the song for you because of copyright reasons, but I'll say this much, it is absolutely beautiful. The two thieves eventually make their way toward a small nation inspired by Europe, at least that's what I think. As Lupin and Jean get stuck on the road, they are passed by a young woman being chased by a group of strange men. The two thieves give chase to save the young lady, who's revealed to be the princess of Cagliostro, Clarice, who proceeds to give her a ring, which Lupin just so happens to recognize. As it turns out, Clarice and Count Cagliostro, the main antagonists of this film, were supposed to get married, but Clarice ended up running away when she was given the opportunity. As it's revealed, the Count is doing this not only to gain power over the small nation, but also reveal the ancient treasure of Cagliostro. Though to do this, the Count has to have both rings. He already has one of them, he just needs to get Clarice's ring as well by marrying her.
An attempt is made to assassinate Lupin and Jigen one night, but the two thieves manage to escape the inn where they resided. After this, Lupin calls for Goemon and Zenigata to enter the plot. Some wacky shenanigans happen with Lupin in the castle until he eventually makes his way towards the roof of it, where after accidentally dropping a small rocket, he is sent running down the roof. He grabs the castle wall leading up to Clarice's room, and when he makes it, he vows to Clarice that he'd help her escape the castle. Until he's caught, and also sent down a trapdoor towards the catacombs of the castle. Which is sort of a callback, you see. There's a scene earlier on where Zenigata gets sent down a trapdoor as well. As it turns out, Lupin and Zenigata both encounter each other in there and make a plan to escape the catacombs. Lupin and Zenigata make it to a room filled with printing presses, which also includes the counterfeit money that was mentioned at the beginning of the film. The two of them proceed to start a fire as they attempt to get to Clarice's room to save her.
Oh yeah, I should have also mentioned Fujiko's there too. She's not as major to the plot as she was in Mystery of Mamo, but she's there. Why am I mentioning this now? All throughout the film, Fujiko is also at the castle investigating the counterfeit money situation, posing as Clarice's servant, but after Lupin arrives and starts the fire in the counterfeit money room, Fujiko takes her leave from the scene for now. So, what does this have to do with anything that's being said right now? Well, Lupin gets shot. To prevent Lupin's death, Clarice finds the place where Lupin was hiding the ring, thanks to Fujiko mind you, and makes a deal with the Count that if he lets Lupin live, she'll give him the ring. Lupin doesn't want this to happen, but Zenigata shows up in the burning autogyro, saving Lupin and Fujiko's life. At the same time, this leaves Clarice in the hands of the Count. Later on, Zenigata makes a case against the counterfeited money that was being printed in the castle, which everyone in the courtroom believes to be false, dismissing Zenigata from the Cagliostro case.
Meanwhile, Lupin is recovering from his injuries, but wants to stop the marriage from happening as well. It's then revealed why Lupin is so familiar with the castle of Cagliostro. 10 years before the movie unfolds, Lupin makes his way towards the castle himself to find the ancient treasure, but ends up getting injured in the process of escaping. As he lies on the ground, injured and hiding, he meets a younger Clarice, who saves his life in the process, which explains why Lupin was acting the way he was throughout the film. The next day, Lupin and the gang make their way towards the castle, this time with Fujiko posing as a camera woman for the news station broadcasting the wedding. Not only this, but Fujiko also tipped Zenigata off, stating that Lupin would be at the wedding as well. The wedding goes as planned, until Lupin shows up to reveal the truth to the people about the money, and runs off with Clarice. Meanwhile, Zenigata, who is previously tasked with capturing Lupin, heads downstairs towards the same exact printing presses where he and Lupin found the counterfeit money, except this time, with the whole world watching.
Lupin and Clarice eventually make their way toward the clock tower. After a couple scenes of fighting and climbing, Lupin, Clarice, and the Count make their way toward the hands of the clock tower, where Lupin makes an offer that'll give the Count the rings in exchange for Clarice's life. But then the Count is all like, fuck that, and takes the rings for himself, throwing Lupin and Clarice off the clock tower into the water. What he forgot to take into account were the giant clock tower hands, eventually crushing him when he finally activates the giant clock tower.
As it turns out, the ancient treasure of Cagliostro turns out to be ancient ruins. As the film wraps up, Clarice exclaims to Lupin that she doesn't want him to go. Lupin states that the two of them will meet again someday, with all of the main gang eventually leaving Cagliostro, ending off the movie, making this the last time we ever see Clarice in any Lupin media ever again.
Not actually true, but I think keeping this in the video would be funny as fuck.
Pigeon, it's not your turn to talk. Why are you here?
Now it is, because it's time for... honest thoughts about this film? I mean, it's like Mystery of Mamo in a sense. It's definitely better than a bunch of other Lupin movies and TV specials, and while it may not be as good as Mamo, though Castle of Cagliostro is definitely up there with Mamo if that makes sense, Castle of Cagliostro sets out to be a damn good movie. One thing I noticed about Mamo and Cagliostro is that they're complete opposites of each other, almost like night and day. Of course, they do have their similarities. Both movies had the same budget of 500 million yen and were released a year apart from each other. But the differences are completely apparent when you look more into it, whereas Mystery of Mamo's Lupin is a more light-hearted version of the character, Castle of Cagliostro's Lupin sets out to be a more serious and grounded character, almost like a matured Lupin. He's had years of experience in thievery before the events of Castle of Cagliostro, of course. He's going to take things more seriously. But I don't know, what do you think, Finny?
I think the opening sequence of this movie does a really good job setting up not just the characters' personalities, but their motivations and the world they interact with, in a way that leads really well into the main plot, even for someone who hasn't seen Lupin III before, which was me before the first time I saw this movie. Right off the bat, they're criminals, but they're smart criminals, they're perceptive, they're silly, they know what they're doing, while still making a few mistakes. We see Lupin as the leader in spite of, or maybe because of his lighthearted confidence, and we see Jigen as his right-hand man, who's more grounded but still willing to buy into Lupin's shenanigans, and this is all within the first couple minutes of the movie. After the opening sequence, we get some exposition and see these guys are definitely motivated by theft and the idea of some big heist that'll get them rich, but not exclusively. They're also motivated by people, by helping someone out of a rough situation, even if it's initially just because she's a cute girl, which gives Lupin a bit more complexity, mostly in that he cares and genuinely has a heart, while still being a thief, ultimately working in self-interest. And I'm not gonna lie, I love seeing Lupin show compassion, especially in tandem with his silliness and his characterization as a criminal. This sentiment follows through the rest of the movie, especially at the end, when we see him reject Clarice's request to stay with him and become a thief. He's not solely in this to gain something. I mean, that's a big part of it, sure, again, he's a thief. He works in self-interest, and in general, he's supposed to be this kind of womanizer. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to people, and when it comes to caring about them, Miyazaki's Lupin is ultimately willing to make sacrifices for the good of others if he sees good in them.
But not only that, there's one more thing I should talk about during this film. You see, I've only talked about my thoughts on the film, but what about the influence the film had? There's two things you should know about Cagliostro as a whole. Castle of Cagliostro didn't do as well in the box office as Mystery of Mamo, which made 900 million yen as opposed to Cagliostro's 600 million yen. That thing you should know. But the influence that Cagliostro has had on a ton of movies and anime is significant, so while Mystery of Mamo did well in the box office, it didn't get recognized as Castle of Cagliostro. After the film's release, that was really it for Miyazaki's journey with Lupin, as he cites it to be his last major work on anything Lupin related, aside from a couple Part 2 episodes considered by the fans to be some of the best episodes of that era. Wings of Death Albatross, episode 145, and Farewell My Beloved Lupin, episode 155, the last episode of Part 2. After Lupin III Part 2 ended its run, Lupin just fell off for a long time. Part 3 had a 50-episode run during the 80s, debuting the Pink Jacket design. Yearly TV specials began airing during the late 80s, and 2 more movies would premiere until 1995's Farewell to Nostradamus, those being Legend of the Gold of Babylon in 1985 and The Fuma Conspiracy in 1987. But neither of them would ever hold a candle to the greatness that is Castle of Cagliostro. After talking a bit more about Lupin III Castle of Cagliostro, I think there's something I can say about it. I think that this film, alongside Mystery of Mamo, are probably the best pieces of Lupin media out there, at least so far, from what I've watched. Here's the thing though, while I stand my ground that Mystery of Mamo is the best Lupin movie, I don't think it's a good starting point for a newcomer to the series. That's why I firmly recommend starting off with Castle of Cagliostro or any other Lupin movie for that matter. I also stand my ground and say that this movie isn't just influential and important, it's also one of the best animated movies I've ever watched. And to clear things up, I think both Lupin films I took a look at are equal of each other, they're just different vibes from another. But one last time, what do you think, Finny?
Yeah, I just can't help but love this movie. It's so pretty, and not to be too repetitive, but I personally love seeing Lupin strike that balance of kindness and self-centeredness, or again, goofiness and seriousness, which in my opinion Castle of Cagliostro captures well. I mean, compared to Mystery of Mamo, this movie is a bit more grounded, but still. Anyways, I think in all fairness, Castle of Cagliostro will always be sentimental to me since my first experience with the movie was my older brother taking me to see it in theater, but I think if you have the time, this movie is ultimately very worth it to check out and possibly my favorite Lupin movie overall.
Cool.
So, is this the end of the review?
I mean, if you want to, there's nothing left to talk about. We've talked about the origins, the entire plot, our thoughts. I don't think there's anything else.
Okay.
But hey, that's just a theory. An anime theory. Until next year, Lupin.